well at the center, 7:30 p.m. There will be cheese. And now the reason that we are all here. Tom and Martha. Tom Laughlin is a professor at Middlesex Community College, where he teaches creative writing, literature, and composition courses, as well as coordinating the MCC Visiting Writer Series and open readings for students, faculty, and community members for the creative writing program. For many years, Tom also coordinated the writing across the curriculum program at Middlesex, coordinated an early academic intervention program, the Writing Center, and creative writing activities at Massasoit Community College for nearly a decade, and taught literature classes in 2 Massachusetts prisons. It's incredible. Tom was a founding editor of Vortext, a literary journal at Massasoit Community College, and a volunteer staff reader for many years at the journal Ploughshares. His poetry and fiction have appeared in Green Mountain Review, Ibbetson Street, Front Monkeys, Sandhills Literary Magazine, Blue Mountain Review, Muddy River Poetry Review, Hare's Paw Literary Journal, and elsewhere. Oh, I left out Molecule too. He's also published academic articles in Teaching English in the 2-year college and elsewhere, as well as an annual calendar, Stone Balancing at Walden Pond, featuring photos of his own stone balancing. His chapbook, The Rest of the Way, was released in 2022 by Finishing Line Press, and there are copies here tonight. And I just want to say on a personal note, beyond the bona fides, every program involving poetry I've been to in the last year and a half, Tom is at. He's the most active, wonderful, poet, one of the most active, wonderful poets I've met in the community around here in the last year and a half. And so I'm so thrilled that he's here to share his work with us today.
The in and the outdoors. Thank you so much, Adam. It's really wonderful to be here, and thanks all of you for being here and people on Zoom virtually. It's really wonderful to be here in Gloucester, and particularly special because I grew up in Topsfield on the North Shore and was a paper boy delivering the Salem Evening News, and went to Topsfield, went to high school at Massasoit and Oxford and all that. And this is my first reading on the North Shore, so back in the home country since my chapbook came out, so it feels really special. The other major reason is it's such an honor to be reading. I'm so glad that Martha agreed to read with me. I studied with Martha many years ago at UMass Boston, and I'm just really honored she's reading with me. It's wonderful. I'm willing to read with her former student. I'm excited to celebrate finally chapbook The Rest of the Way. As mentioned, Finishing Line Press. I published poems back in that UMass Boston days. First poems were at Green Mountain Review many years ago, and I thought by the age of 35 I'd have a book or chapbook, and life and daughter and work at a community college got in the way a little bit, so I'm a little older than 35, but it's nice to have a book come out. And it's dedicated to my daughter, who's a lover of poetry and poetry club member at UMass Amherst, where she graduated last May. And it's also dedicated to my mother, who lived up here in Topsfield and wrote poetry and published in some small newspapers up here in the North Shore. And she died at the beginning of COVID in April 2020. So nice to be back in her country and honor her. The book, themes in the book: life lessons, journeys and experiences with the natural world, family relationships, romantic relationships, and response poems. I'll try to read a few of each of those, or some of each of those. A trigger warning for violence for the first and the third poem that I'm going to read. And the first is called Early Lessons. And I grew up, as I mentioned, in Topsfield. I worked on a farm in Boxford, in between the delivering newspapers, and as a young teen, and working on a farm, you can't help but to learn life lessons. So this poem is called Early Lessons. I remember a pig chewing on the back of a live chicken on a farm when I was 14, kicked out of its coop at midday by my pitchfork scraping the crusty floor. It climbed into the pig stall, looking for shade from the yard's burning heat. Patty came quickly, following my frantic sprint, the dogs barking behind, to grab the still blinking chicken from grunting snouts. Too far gone, he spun it by the neck and held it out to flutter, jerk, then hang limp from his hand. I was driving to Topsfield one Christmas a number of years ago, and if people have been on Route 1 flat and then suddenly entering Topsfield and these big rolling hills, fields, horses, and I got thinking about how important the physical space was for me in ways that I carried that. This poem is called Turning Home. These hills have echoed in my ears for decades, boulder flecked peaks rattling my windy thoughts, tree birds chirping me higher. I have smelled these fields through my shoulders wherever I pause, sun-drenched blades rippling for wind, rasping every movement, tickling my muscles with hot greenness. These horses have grazed my chest even now through frosted, crisp December air, tails waving hypnotic symphonies, nostril snorts filling my lungs. This lake has burrowed into my bones, lapping steadily under skin, sky reflecting through turtled fingers, swallowing my muddy darkness. These woods have crackled my feet at every step, oaked messages whispering into souls, hidden twigs laughing between toes, pine tops sprouting through my skull. I am a lover of jazz, and actually, no, I want to jump to Flamingo, yes. I gave people a warning, I got to keep it in that order. The horrors going on in Ukraine have reminded us all of the tragedies and the ways that people are traumatized by war, even those who survive, and the ways that generations are impacted by that. In World War II, the U.S. infantry common rifle was M1 Garand, and the gun kicked shells off to the right. Those who were lefties would go in front of their face and hit them in the face. And some of those lefties in a company would be designated and trained to use a flamethrower, a horrible weapon that shoots a flame 45 yards and burns everything in sight. Flamethrower. A lefty, the guns weren't made for him. So he became a flamethrower, flushing out foxholes that couldn't be cleared. Children on fire still ripped through his dreams, forcing him down to the kitchen chair at 3 a.m. for a cigarette, highball, and late movie. I knew only hatred then, standing below that bald leather head, slapped in the face by the crooked fingers of his open hand. Dead bodies, malaria, teeth knocked in, words shouted into arguments too often to sting when intended, burn years later for a flamethrower's son. I started to mention, and jumped back to that, but I'm a lover of jazz and fan of Eric in the Evening for many years. He passed away last year. And I love improvisational jazz and the play between musicians, a central riff theme, and keyboard player will take off with a solo, bending those notes, stretching, and while the others sort of sit back, support that, and kind of look on in awe and sort of see where that's going to take that. soloist, and then it gets thrown over to the guitarist, who then takes it where they will in their solo and stretching and bending those notes while the others sort of sit back and support. And I love that and wanted somehow for years to capture that somehow in the poem. I couldn't think how. And I was driving to the North Shore, Peabody, Route 1, and listening to Eric in the evening in an August night. And this first few lines of this poem struck me, and I went with it. So here it is. Jazz. Dancing boy, dancing girl, and a boy again tiptoeing on the wooden raft, circling as it sways. He circles and it sways in the stillness of the creek, around and to the diving board where he rattles and thumps and springs, twirling, floating, up and out and curving down to slice, then splash, then explode up and out, splashing, shouting, laughing at the moon, swirling the hot summer dusk, thrashing and kicking with smiling wetness before climbing the ladder to sit back, smile, and watch to see the girl tiptoe on the swaying dock, circle, no, not circle, almost circle to the edge, then almost circle again. As the creek stills, ripples slightly, anticipation, her footsteps pat the dampened wood. She finds the worn wooden board, bobs up, rattles, and slaps, running to take that board, bending, springing as part of the swing of her arms, soaring upward. The slow, subtle arc and twist of her naked shoulders outward, twirling, floating, flying outward and down, slicing unexpectedly, swallowing her reflection, toes pointing to the last, the aching, unruffling pause before exploding up, smiling, laughing to herself, to the raft, to that hot-mooned, dusky August day. And she turns, splashing, suddenly racing toward the reaching branched shore tree. The boy now unfolds his sitting to sprint, thumping and springing out quickly over creek water, spraying strokes, pushing in pursuit of the laughing hare, reaching toward the rooted wild grass bank. She grabs the knotted rope past the thick trunk, up the dirt path, pausing, deep breath jump, holding, hanging, swishing beyond the trunk and path, whistling wildly over grassy bank, then water, then over the boy, half out of the creek, caught in a broadening smile of awe and appreciation, watching the arcing girl as she sails, then dances on her smooth water reflection. And my mother was a big fan, as I am a big fan, of Mary Oliver. And I also am a big open water swimmer and swim in ponds and lakes from May to Halloween. Samhain usually is my ending time. And my mother and daughter and family, I did see Mary Oliver once at Wellesley College many years ago. It was wonderful. But she died in 2019, January. And I had an experience at Walden Pond, swimming at Walden Pond in September of 2019. It reminded me of her famous poem, The Summer Day, which includes her with a grasshopper eating sugar out of her hand. And so my poem is called The Late Summer Day, for Mary Oliver. Halfway across Walden Pond, the mid-September sun, bright above the tree line, reflects off the smooth surface and warms my squinting face as I swim, my hands reaching gently through the clear water of this late afternoon. The thickness of woods along the shores holds me in its arms as I turn to swim back towards sandy shore and the old wooden bathhouse basking in light, with a speckle of old swimmers and beach chair readers. Floating in the water just ahead of me, a small stick or piece of trash distracts me until closer, I see the light green body, the orange stripe, and the small legs of a grasshopper, motionless. How did she get here, far out in the middle, with no grass or land in sight? No boats today, with a fisherman who may not have noticed the quiet stowaway. And how have the trout, bass, and pickerel missed this tasty morsel? I reach to cup its body in one hand, water draining through my fingers to see and feel the hair-like front legs and feathery body until it jumps, alive suddenly. How? Landing just ahead, back on the water. I'm the only island in sight, I think, and slower this time, cup my hand and lift, gently carrying her toward the top of my head, where she steps on, clinging to my wet hair. Holding my neck and head as still as possible on the long swim in, I feel her move through my hair, climbing to higher ground perhaps. And I wonder what she sees from her perch with those enormous and complicated eyes, and whether Mary Oliver ever carried a grasshopper on her head. As my feet touch sand, my head rising with its passenger, I walk slowly out of the water, across the sand, past toweling swimmers and a curious child, up to the stone-walled ledge, where I bow my head to the thick blades of green beyond, feel the small snap of her back legs, and see her fling herself back into the grass. I love James Wright's poetry and also ancient Chinese poets who have these long, delicious titles. I love James Wright's long, fun, playful titles. And this is a short love poem with a very long title. It's called Finally Beyond the Pine Tree Back Roads of My Morning Commute, I Think of You Early This September Morning. The bright sun kisses the cornfields that I pass, grown tall and stretched near to bursting, with plump kernels of sweetness within, golden gems that sparkle and spill out over the tops, yellow happiness dancing like fireworks against a green stalked sky. Because of you, I too feel these golden gems, this yellow happiness, this full heart bursting into dance. When I'm not swimming, and usually I'm swimming in places that have woods, I'm hiking in the woods and walk every day and get out in nature. And I joke with my students that I'm a tree hugger. I have for years, and I am a tree hugger. And I got thinking about where that began. And that led to this poem and some memory, an early memory of experiences. So this poem is called Dendrophile, which means lover of trees. Dendrophile. They were our jungle gyms, our hanging bars, our hobby horses, our August cooling tents, our winter snow shakers, our climbing walls, our mountaintops, our citadels. They surrounded us as we ran chasing each other past their sappy bark, over pine needle thickened paths, the forest floor squishy with mulch, and the fibrous reaching roots of these silent sentinels standing watch over our boyhood selves as we grabbed for sticks at our feet, broken branches weakened by boring insects, chiseled by birds bashing their hungry heads, and cracked loose by the weight of winter. Swinging and slamming these against trunks, snapping pieces that spun in the air, flying past ecstatic eyes, and nearly clipping our crew-cutted heads. And whose 6-year-old challenge was it that day, which set us attempting to climb pole-thin pines with their pencil-pointed stubs of branches long choked off by the thick canopy of green high above. Grabbing scratchy trunks, we stepped carefully, slowly, easing our weight onto one bone-dry stub, then another, the height competition continuing until a brittle crack to suddenly drop us tumbling to pine needle floor. Then, unthinking, my sights on bragging rights, I reached up one stubbled trunk, hugging too closely its scratchy bark as I climbed until the crack, the sudden drop, the unseen sharpened stub, slicing as I slid toward forest floor, a thin red line from my belly to chest. Afterwards, the stitches, the bandages, the long torso scar were show and tell exhibits until puberty and chest hair and decades erased any visible sign of that first woodland infection when sap began running through my veins. I want to shift the book a moment to a couple poems recently published, and it's wintertime, and I thought I'd hit a winter poem. This was published in the winter issue of the Orchards Poetry Journal. When there really was a New England winter a few winters ago, this connection, I guess, the Kobayashi Isa is a famous Japanese haiku artist, one of the great four. Japan lived 1760s to 1820s, in that range. So, short poem called Walking After Snowstorm with Kobayashi Isa. The neighborhood's spruce frosted against a blue sky. Puff of snow, a druid's pipe hidden beneath boughs. White pines, delicate fingers flicker with sunlight. Their rays warming taps, snowy house of cards downward. Mist sparkling now in the breath of this birdless day. And last Friday, there was a release celebration of the most recent Ibbetson Street magazine, and my poem Prison Class was in that. The news in the last few years has included mention of a former student, an inmate, who's been written about, and many people trying to help him because of the injustice of him being in prison for so long. That got me thinking back to those prison days and writing more about that. Another poem accepted last week in Pensive, that's a prison poem. But this poem is about this gentleman, and it's a villanelle, strict form, using repetition and rhyme, if people aren't aware. It's called Prison Class. In any other culture, he'd be a prince, whispered the guest writer I brought to prison that night, knowing of his poor court-appointed defense. A bright high school athlete with a mother from Port-au-Prince, he became a Marine to keep college in his sights, though in any other culture, he'd be a prince. On leave, his warning shot above the bat-waving mob was self-defense, fleeing a party detonated by a racial fight. But his was a poor court-appointed defense. Inside gray walls, the young man spoke with quiet confidence of Welty, Faulkner, Baldwin, and Updike. I felt in any other culture he'd be a prince. The trial, no ballistics that might have proved his innocence, but a white man was killed that night. A shame about the poor court-appointed defense. Decades he's been behind walls ever since the judge gave him natural life. In another culture, he might have been a prince, but instead he got a poor court-appointed defense. And relatively good news in the context is that The governor commuted his sentence almost a year ago, and he did get out in June after 31 years in prison. And I will finish tonight with the title poem, my book, The Rest of the Way, which was written and comes out of my days at UMass Boston with Martha, and jogging the peninsula there, Columbia Point Peninsula, and imagining an old timer, someone as old as I am at this point, walking someone through and sort of showing them what's there and what they know. So the rest of the way. Start here, just beyond the chain fence on the back street. It turns to footpath ahead, then left along the water. There's wild grass and seagulls, and the path breaks down into dirt around a boarded up pump house. Look at the islands out a ways and bridge connecting two with the mainland. The dock by that white house there has boats sometimes, visitors. Breathe in seaweed, even dead fish smells, but don't stop. Round that corner, the city large across the bay, above the beach where old men swim naked every day, even through winter. The steps of stone are wide but low. They curve too, like a rising tunnel, pulling you to streets and long needled spruce that reach, asking for the brush of a hand passing. Down the slope, past the field that fills with pheasants in spring, go right, and you'll recognize the rest of the way. Thank you.